Hey everyone, this is Keith, the creator of Winning Love by Daylight. I'm going to be doing a quick Q&A of some of the questions that people have been asking in the Discord for a while now. Before recording this, I put out the option for people to send in some questions, and I have a short list here. So if I miss something that you really wanted to ask, then I'll try and cover it in another one later on, but this is what we've got to start with. First of all of the characters' last names. Now, in the visual novel, we only get really to call everyone by their first name, and we don't really see their last name. We don't really meet their parents, and you only really meet the main character's parents as mum and dad. So starting from the top, it's Emily Darling. Her mother is Agatha Darling, and her aunt is Esther Middlehill. That's already in the Wikia or fandom wiki, whatever it's called. Then we've got Molly Stevens, Kiana Kakawa. I pray that I pronounced that correctly. Willow Emeralds, because her parents are super hippies. They changed their last name in like the 70s or something, and then gave her a super hipster name. Then we've got Alana, which is really funny. On Talrea, the way that names are formatted is that the first two letters of your name is your family name. So, and like the equivalent on Earth would be like Anna, Al, but when she says it to them in the comic for the first time, she's like, my name is Alana, and they're like, oh, we have a name on our planet just like that, Alana, and she's like, I guess that is me, you know. And then it's June Lee, which is really funny because when it was first asked, someone posted in the chat, I bet it's this, and I didn't want to be like, yes, okay, but like, not because you said so. Then we've got Maya Jones, and lastly Sophie Dupont, who's like super French. And that's all of their last names. Then the second question is, since Alana is like Starfire, does she have powers similar to her? So on Talrea, most of the development of the society was through like magic and telepathy rather than science and engineering like we did on Earth. So most of what Alana can do is healing, but then also she can fly. She has some telekinetic powers, so she could be able to lift things up and throw things, and sort of project energy out, like in the same way that Starfire sort of shoots those balls of energy at people. Alana would be able to do something similar to that. Then we've got, what are the girls' favorite animals and how many of them own cats? I'm just going to do the second half of that. How many of them own cats? So Sophie and Emily both have cats, except Emily's cat is more like a familiar. Her cat Shadow can actually talk. Like if you can imagine Salem from Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Shadow is to Emily like Blade is to June. They both kind of give each other grief. Shadow is like really sassy and mostly hangs out at the Pickled Skunk, which is where Emily spends most of her time when she's not at school. And then the next question, what are some enemies, grunts or others, that we can expect to fight in the game? So this is a really good one because there's a few different categories of enemies. We've got basically generic monsters like the skeletons and stuff. Then we've got rivals. Each of the girls is going to have their own personalized rival, which is kind of like something in particular that um, challenges them or rubs them the wrong way, or is like an antithesis of what they are as a character. Um, and then there's the big boss. So, for example, the Skeleton King is the big boss of the first arc, and then the skeletons that we see Emily fight one briefly, and then Emily and Kiana fight them at the beginning of the comic are sort of the grunts of the Skeleton King, and there's an equivalency for that for each of the arcs. Each of the arcs is determined by what big bad they're fighting. So the 4 arcs is the Skeleton King, then it's Mekra, then it's Moloch, and then it's Amnath. Each of them each of like the big villains corresponds to a girl's particular storyline. And I've revealed so far that Moloch is related to Molly, is her grandfather. We've then also got Amnath, which is kind of Alana's huge villain. But then we've also got Mekra, which is directly related to Maya. I don't mean as in like it's her dad. I mean like she's the character upon which Mekra is designed for. And the Skeleton King, which is for Emily. And then each of those 4 have their own sort of grunts that will show up and will be like the low level generic kind of monsters to fight. And then each character has their own rival, and the rivals don't interact with the arcs as much. They're kind of other characters that are at the schools that are sort of like a constant challenge rather than part of the overarching storyline. So far, all of the rivals haven't been revealed. I want to try and leave that as something that comes out a bit later. But for now in the Discord, I'm pretty sure I've talked about 2 of them. One of which is Emily's rival and one of which is June's rival. June's rival being Marshall, who's on the football team with Kiana. And Emily's rival, Zole, who's like half Naga. And like, whereas most of the girls hide their superpowers, Zole kind of flaunts it. And she's like, yeah, I'm half dragon snake thing. I'm the coolest thing out there. And it makes her really popular. But then she's like super fake and conceited. Okay, next question. Which girl was first made and which girl was last? So the first one was Sophie. Sophie was designed at a time where the original plan for the game was to be much, much smaller. The visual novel didn't exist yet as a concept, and it was going to be a small board game. The idea was to create a bunch of female characters that were similar to things that were in pop culture, and so Sophie is designed after the lo-fi beats girl. That's where some of her backstory comes from. And then as it changed and developed, Sophie evolved as a character as well, and that's why her name is spelled with a capitalization in the middle of it. Because it's the same as lo-fi beats. It's supposed to be like a call out. And then the last girl that was designed was Molly, which is really funny because you think the character that is my favorite, Molly, would have been done earlier, but basically we had like written out all the design briefs for a lot of the characters that had been done, and I'm like, look, these are the kind of archetypes that I'm looking for. I want a character that's close to this, a character that's close to this. And towards the end, I was just like, you know what, let's just make a demon character, something really ridiculous. And what Molly ended up being was halfway between Hellboy and Raven from Teen Titans, which was really weird. But I really liked how it turned out, and her backstory is then used as one of the major arcs, which I think is really cool as well. And it follows along, like her backstory is pretty much the same center of the Venn diagram between Raven's relationship with Trigon, except it's Molly's grandfather, Moloch, and Hellboy's destiny to basically destroy humanity. I'm not going to elaborate on it any more than that. That is already a lot of info. And then the next question is, what are the girls' hobbies? So Molly plays the drums and keyboard, something that she inherited from her dad, who's in a band. Willow's really into gardening. It's no surprise. Alana is really into astronomy, which kind of comes from wanting to reconnect with the home planet she's left. So learning a lot about space and looking up at the stars has that kind of whimsical connection that she has for being away from home in a way. Sophie is really into role-playing games and board games, which is something that we're going to see very soon, and I'm very excited about. And we've got Maya, who's into computer games, which is no surprise. You can see it all the way through the visual novel. She's playing Castles of Calaroxus with the main character. But she also plays a lot of other little stuff, and she's set up a business where she will play MMORPGs and set up bots for them and stuff like that. And using her powers, it's really easy to micromanage a lot of this stuff. And then selling item drops to people online. And if you remember back in the day, anyone that played Diablo 2, there was hundreds of bots that would just automatically farm gear and then sell them on websites, which I'm pretty sure still exists now. It's pretty much a similar thing to that, except it's a lot easier for her to manage it all on her own. And that's how she pays for her rent above the convenience store. Then we've got June. So June spends a lot of time meditating and practicing martial arts, which is not a surprise. That's kind of shown in the visual novel, but it takes a lot of discipline from her to be able to put up with Blade. If you could imagine having someone that is personally interested in you being annoyed and frustrated all of the time, as I'm sure anyone that has a child would understand. But also she enjoys painting. That's something that she doesn't get a lot of time for, but it's something that she would try and do at the beach. It's like a lot of the stuff that she tries to do as a person is around finding a relaxed center, so that when she's stressed out from stuff like the responsibilities of Blade or being challenged by monsters or regular high school stress and stuff like that, that she can use these hobbies to relax and disconnect from the troubles in her life. Then we've got Emily. So Emily spends most of her time either working at the Pickled Skunk, which is the tavern that her mum and aunt own, which is kind of like the air quotes home base of all the characters, and that's where they would go to. It's like the clubhouse, whatever. They'd go to meet up before there's a big monster fight or whatever. And she would work there part time. She would hang out with all the other girls when they come through and hang out there. What we're right about to see in the comic is that they're about to go into the Pickled Skunk and introduce Alana to a bunch of people who just happen to be hanging out there already. And hanging out with her cat, who is pretty much always at the Pickled Skunk. And there's always lots of stuff to do and lots of people traveling through. Like if you could imagine you're one of the magical folk of any particular variety, this is kind of like a spot on the horizon that you angle your compass towards when you're traveling through the country. You know, like it's a place where you can stop and rest. And so they'll get a lot of people coming through there, and they'll get a lot of people that are new and interesting and have a story to tell or whatever, which is kind of cool. And then for Kiana, the last one, Kiana has a lot of her time spent as part of the football team. She's one of the main players on it, and she spends a lot of time doing training and spending time with the other members of the football team. But then also her mum kicks her ass to work out a a lot. So like she's got her own home gym, and she'll be like doing regular exercising stuff as well. So even though you might be one of the strongest people on the planet, she still pushes herself to work out. And then that's that one. And the next question is, how tall are all the girls? So this is one where I'm like, not, hey, here it is in feet and inches. I have them split into 3 categories. The first category is small. And in that category is Molly, Willow, and Alana. Then we have medium, which is Sophie, Maya, and June. And then tall, which is Emily and Kiana. So in the main menu art and in the picture that you will see in the video, all of the characters are put in there by me, not the good graphic designer person, and they all look to be around the same size, and then Kiana is humongous. And what I was really trying to do is to push a perspective where they all kind of drew to the center, and it didn't work very well. But yeah, Emily and Kiana are about the same size. They're both really tall, even though in the picture she looks really short in comparison, and Kiana looks like a monolith of a character. And then Alana and Molly and Willow are all pretty small, Molly being the smallest. And then everyone else is kind of in the middle. Of the medium height people, June is the taller one. And then of the small people, Willow is the taller one. Yeah, and then the last question, which girl arc is the best in your opinion? This is a really tough one. The first one is probably the worst one because I have to spend so much time introducing concepts and introducing all the characters, and I basically have to really slowly walk you through everything. It's like playing the tutorial for a role-playing game. There's so much hand holding. It's like hey, press forward on the thumbstick to walk to this next spot. And it means that there's a lot of stuff that I have to introduce you to so that when I do crazy, insane stuff later on, it's actually impactful and it makes a lot of sense. So the first arc with the Skeleton King introduces the concept where if the girls are overly public about being heroes or using their powers and stuff like that, that there is a force out there that is trying to expose them and will use that as leverage to destroy them. In most superhero stories, like Spider-Man, for example, in the Raimi Spider-Man movies, there's a big deal where it's about if everyone finds out that you're Spider-Man, the people that you love will get hurt as a reaction to that, right? In this, these are all like teenagers that have families and stuff, and they're all linked together in a certain way because they're all a big team, really. Which makes it tough for you to be able to make those same sacrifices. So there's a lot of pressure on them for that. And that kind of exists even beyond the Skeleton King, but it's used to introduce them to that kind of pressure. And then the second arc is the Maya arc. And the Maya arc is like pretty much immediately after the Skeleton King shows up. They're all kind of coming into their own as superheroes is really the wrong word. Magical girls is probably more correct. But they're going on patrols at night. They're fighting monsters that show up around the town. And in the visual novel, the concept is presented that what Pecky has done is started drawing powerful magical beings towards him because he knows that he needs all the help he can get in fighting a threat that comes later on. But the downside of that is he can't tell all he can tell is like powerful stuff. Like you can't tell if they're good or evil. So he's also drawing a lot of evil stuff to him at the same time, and it's like an unfortunate drawback of the process, but it's like necessary. And so all of the girls are pushed to be fighting those evil things that show up as well, and like that's why Zolay is there as well. In the same way that the other girls' parents and stuff found a way to move to this small town, Zolay's parents brought her along to here as well. And same with the skeletons and the Skeleton King and all that kind of stuff. And then in the Maya arc, Mekra, which is a big robot. Now, the robot isn't inherently good or evil as a creation, right? Shows up and starts smashing up the town and stuff like that. And when Maya touches Mekra, you know, hey, it's a robot, it runs on electricity, I'll touch it and figure out what it's doing. As soon as she touches it, Matt falls out. Now, Matt is Maya, but from an alternate reality. And Matt is basically has the same kind of backstory as Maya, where their parents died. The difference is that rather than becoming a hero with his powers, Matt created Mekra out of grief to like have vengeance and destroy things. Except something went wrong, and now both Mekra and Matt exist in the Winning Love by Daylight canon universe. And then a lot of stuff spirals on from that, and then eventually at the end of the arc, Kiana and Maya have this big fight where we see both of them really at full power going at each other, because Kiana is convinced that Matt is evil and needs to be killed, and Maya is like, this person is the only family that I have. Either you see him as my brother or you see him as me, basically, and there's no way that I'm letting you take him from me. And so this huge conflict happens between the two of them. And that's probably going to be one of the huge points, big points in all of the arcs. And then I mentioned a little bit about what happens in Molly arc earlier, where her grandfather pushes her to fulfill her destiny or whatever. Bring redemption to the bloodline, because Molly's mother, Isabel, is banished from where all of the demons hang out, and ends up on Earth and then has Molly. And so Moloch, trying to get redemption for his daughter Isabel, his betrayal, is trying to push Molly to become more of an archfiend like Moloch. And Molly, who's been hanging around superheroes, like the ultimate lawful good force in the universe for so long, obviously doesn't want to murder everybody, and so there's a huge conflict there. And in Molly arc is when we see one of the major fruitions of one of the relationships in the game. I'm not going to say who it is just yet. I want that to be a big surprise later on. I've already dropped so much exciting stuff with just the Maya arc. None of that had really been revealed before. And then the last arc is Amnath, and Amnath is, for lack of a better comparison, very similar to Thanos. Basically, on Talrea, Alana's home planet, then Alana's mother is killed by Amnath, and Amnath is trying to have to gain control of the throne, kind of like a coup. Whereas most of the Talreans are peaceful types, sub-faction are really warlike, like Amnath and his followers, and they try and take over Talrea. And Alana escapes because as long as Alana is alive as the heir, Amnath can't take over the throne, and there's still hope for the Tel'aran people, which is obviously not strong enough to fight herself yet. Like, she's still a kid compared to her mother, who was already pretty strong. And Amnath eventually finds Alana on Earth and comes to fight, basically. And that's the kind of the conclusion of the 4-arc series. And Amnath is the big evil thing that Pecky has been worried about this whole time, because like he's basically a planet conqueror. He intends to come here and murder everything, and that's the apocalyptic future that Pecky foresees. And then basically that is like the ultimate conflict, where we see all of the girls really come together for the first time to fight 8 versus 1, where it's like really they are a team fighting together, whereas in the Molly arc it's kind of like more of a social battle. In Mecra arc it's more like fighting in amongst the team rather than fighting the big bad. Mecha is more like a plot device than it is actually a big villain. And then at the conclusion of the 4th arc, there's another huge, big event that I'm not going to spoil just yet, but it will change one of the characters that we have forever, which will be really interesting, and I'm really excited to show that off, but that's 100 years away from when we'll actually get there. And yeah, that's my list of questions for right now. That's obviously a lot for people to think about and digest, and maybe watch again and listen back to in a few ways. And for people to post fan theories in the Discord, I'd love to hear what you think is going to happen and what's going on, and hear about what's happening. People in the Discord are already really upset about what I've said and have questions. Yeah, I'm not going to answer that. You guys can figure that out on your own when it happens in 100 years. Anyway, that's it for today. I'm going to go ahead and hopefully see you in the Discord, and you can come and tell me what you would like to know for the next Q&A.